Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to part 2 of the Dorset Council Northern Area Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Sherry Jesperson, chair of this committee, and just so we can resume where we left off, I will indicate the members that are the councillors that are with us this afternoon. We have councillors Tim Cook, Matt Hall, Brian Heatley, Carol Jones, Mary Penfold, Val Pothecary and Belinda Rideout. Members, the first thing we have to do is vote to extend the meeting because this is a full day meeting, and though it's in 2 parts, it still needs a vote to extend it beyond our 3 hours. So could I have a proposer, please, and a seconder to extend the meeting?
So proposed, Chairman.
Thank you. That's Councillor Penfold. Seconded.
Val Pothecary, second.
That's Councillor Pothecary seconding. Can I take, we won't run through the vote. Can I ask anybody to indicate if they don't agree that we extend the meeting? I'm hearing nothing. That is therefore unanimous that we have agreed to extend the meeting. I hope that's acceptable. Our solicitor will come in and tell me if that wasn't a firm enough vote. I'm seeing nothing. Good, that's lovely. Thank you. Can we move on then to our next agenda item? This is for 7 new dwellings and ancillary car parking at Frogmore Lane in Sixpenny Handley. We have Senior Planning Officer Emily Jones, who's going to give us her presentation. Emily, the floor and the screen is yours when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just share my screen.
That's lovely. That's lovely. We have it. Thank you, Emily.
Good. Good afternoon, Chair. This application is proposing 7 new dwellings at Sixpenny Handley with ancillary car parking. So the proposal is sited in this red outline area just off Frogmore Lane. Sixpenny Handley is to the northeast of the site. However, as you will see from the image to your right, the site is actually located within the village infilling boundary of Sixpenny Handley. The site slopes down to the southwest with the fields, and there is a drainage channel that runs through into a culvert to a little drainage pond opposite Back Lane. So this is an aerial image of the site. As you can see at the moment, it's sort of a paddock field area with Sixpenny Handley, the built up area of Sixpenny Handley here, with one sort of property, the old rectory up here with their adjoining land boundary. The site would be accessed from Red Lane along here. This image shows that the flooding extent in the area, the sort of surrounding land is prone to flooding, particularly along Back Lane here, whereas that's that culvert pond I talked about earlier. So the site is sort of here from the earlier image. So they've actually, if I bring up the site plan, so the site plan shows how they've arranged the 7 dwellings. They have sited the dwellings so as to avoid that area of flooding that you saw on the previous image, which showed that the flooding sort of comes down here, drains down into this field before going across Back Lane. So the dwellings have all been sited outside of an area at risk of flooding. So they themselves are not at risk of flooding. Access, vehicular and pedestrian access, is shown to be onto Red Lane. Red Lane in itself doesn't have any flooding issues, and vehicles can access up to the sort of northeast and get out and away from it if Back Lane was to flood, could still safely escape any flooding that occurs sort of Frogmore Lane and Back Lane. So they would also be safe in that context. The development has also proven that it can attenuate its own increase in runoff. So it would not make flood conditions worse anywhere else in the vicinity of the site. It's not going to increase flooding on Back Lane or on Frogmore Lane, so nothing would change. There is a pedestrian access showing back up to Frogmore Lane. Obviously in times of flooding, that wouldn't be usable, but obviously, as I previously mentioned, residents could safely walk or drive onto Red Lane here. Its development is arranged in a sort of cul-de-sac arrangement. There's a couple of neighbours up Paddock Close that are quite close proximity, but there is a sort of satisfactory distance between plot 1, which is sort of the closest property, to those dwellings there. So it's not considered that this plot would have a negative impact on neighbour amenity. The dwellings have been designed in a way that's respectful of the character of the area and of the sort of wider landscape impact. There's a variety and mix of palettes, material palette and design. There's sort of a mix of brick, render, timber cladding. The design of the dwellings is considered acceptable and not to sort of result in any kind of landscape harm or harm to sort of the character of the area. And they sort of feel like they've been appropriately designed. This is an image of Red Lane. So this is where the access would be. You've sort of got one dwelling sort of here, but this is the access to Red Lane that would be sort of opened up with visibility splays. This shows the site. So those are the properties on Paddock Close. You've got the old rectory behind. So the dwellings would be sort of sited at this point. And again, this is sort of showing that area. So the dwellings would all be sited at this sort of part of the site away from the areas of flooding. And sort of this is sort of the area that sort of would be left as it is to sort of carry out the sort of same functions as a sort of floodplain as it does now. It's considered that the application is sort of acceptable in those regards. It's recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Steve Savage, do you want to make some comments on the access and the highways aspect of this? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got very little to add to the case officer's explanation of the site. The access that you saw in the photos will be provided with.
We have the slide back up that shows the access, so we can follow that.
Sure. Perhaps, Emily, you could show the photos you took of the access. That would be quite useful. Yeah,
good. Thank you.
OK, well, the access is sort of set to the rear of that informal lay-by arrangement that you can see.
Yeah.
So there will be some slight impact on the hedgerow when the visibility displays are formed, but my understanding is that they'll be trimming and then reinforcing the hedge, so there shouldn't be any loss to the visual amenity. And of course, as far as we're concerned, it's the safety which is the paramount thing, which they've achieved. The on-site car parking shown on the layout complies with the authority's guidance, provides within plot curtilage parking, and plenty of opportunity for visitors to park on the internal estate road. Cycle storage has been provided for each dwelling. It's my understanding that the estate road is to remain private and its maintenance will remain the responsibility of the developer or residents or housing company. Hence, the Highway Authority has got no objection to the proposal, subject to a number of conditions which you'll see listed in the report. Thank you, Chair.
That's grand. Thank you very much. Now we have representations from 3 objectors, the parish council. I think we're hearing from the ward member if he's here, and the agent. Nicola, would you like to start reading for us with our 3 objectors and the parish council?
Yep. Okay, Stuart McLean against the application. My name is Stuart McLean and I wish to object in the strongest terms to the proposed planning application by Rushmore Estates and Midsummer Homes to site 7 new houses on the site of the field located at the junction of Frogmore Lane and Back Lane in Sixpenny Handley. I have lived in Frogmore Farmhouse, which is located immediately opposite the proposed development site for 25 years, in which time the roadway in Frogmore Lane and Frogmore Field opposite have flooded to a serious degree on 4 separate occasions, most recently in the winter of 2013-14. The junction of Frogmore Lane and Back Lane, where I live, lies at the very lowest point of the village, geographically speaking, which means that the combination of surface water and underground sewerage water combine above and below ground at this very junction, at which periods of excess inclemency mean that the field and the roadway flood to such depths that I lose access to my own house entrance on Frogmore Lane and have to revert to access from Back Lane. I trust that you will be aware that this is not the first time that such an application has been submitted to develop this same field. In 1989, an application was made by Rushmore Estates to build houses on the field. The parish council objected to this development on the grounds of surface water flooding in the immediate area. East Dorset District Council agreed with the parish view and rejected the application. The developer appealed the rejection and the Secretary of State appointed an inspector to intervene. In 1992, he upheld the District Council's rejection in his 3-page report dated 3rd of August 1992. The inspector in his report said that he considered one of the main issues in the case to be whether surface water could be disposed of satisfactorily without leading to flooding on the site and elsewhere. In his conclusions at the end of his report, the inspector said, "I have strong doubts that the problem of water backing up and onto the site can be overcome. I have concluded that surface water cannot be disposed of satisfactorily without leading to flooding on the site and elsewhere. I hereby dismiss this appeal." Nothing I would submit has changed since that planning inspector's report and is as valid today as it was in 1992. Mr. A. Lithgow against the application. This application by Rushmore Farms Limited and Midsummer Homes Limited for 7 new homes has been slightly amended this time around, but it is substantially the same as the one submitted 2 years ago. Therefore, it will come as no surprise to anyone that my objection is the same as the one I put forward in 2020. My concern is the flood risk that the development scheme poses not only to the proposed new homes, but to those existing properties adjoining the development site and to the surrounding roads as well. The site has been flooded 4 times in the previous 23 years during heavy rain. Just 18 months ago, part of the field next to the site and nearby highways, including Frogmore Lane and Back Lane, were awash with water after a downpour lasting barely 30 minutes. Pictures have been taken of this event by a local parish councillor and are available on request. I dread to think of what might have happened had the houses envisaged in this plan had been built at the time. In 1992, a planning inspector appointed by then the Secretary of State for the Environment upheld East Dorset District Council's decision to refuse planning permission to develop the Frogmore Lane field because of the flood perils involved. Since then, meteorological experts have been warning of the prospect of far more extreme rainy spells in the years to come due to the impact of climate change. A prediction endorsed by the respected environmental organisation Greenpeace, which has recently declared that houses should never be built on land liable to flood. The applicants themselves are clearly aware of the dangers. In their application document 2 years ago, in answer to the question, "Is the site within an area at risk of flooding?" they ticked the yes box. I am puzzled as to how they could ever hope to get a decent price for these homes on an open market, given the risks involved. That is assuming, of course, that properties are intended for sale, as opposed to being built as holiday lettings to cater for the staycation boom caused by the continuing uncertainty over foreign travel. I ask the committee to reject this application. Ian and Jackie Merweather against the application. We strongly object to the proposed development in Frogmore Lane. The risk-benefit analysis of this application for only 7 properties in the village is not attractive. 1. The developers have provided no substantial evidence or convincing argument that the flooding risks which have previously been a basis for refusal of consent in 1992 have diminished. The arguments they have deployed on the past flooding to support their application have been shown to be selective and subjective. The actual evidence of experience provided by me and other villagers who have lived here for many years clearly supports a basis for concern. 2. Wessex Water acknowledges the particular issues that have risen regard foul water dispersal in the village and have raised them during this application. To date, little substantial additional work to upgrade foul water defences have been put in place. 3. The application includes proposals to now include access off Red Lane, a narrow, tricky single-track road which is used as a commuter rat run to bypass the village centre. This development has the potential to significantly increase the probability for traffic accidents and risk to pedestrians. 4. There are other areas within the village envelope which provide opportunity for further residential development, including affordable housing, which attract none of the attendant flooding risk or traffic risk that this application brings. David Chick, Chairman of Planning, Sixpenny and Pentridge Parish Council. My name is David Chick and I'm the current Chairman of Planning for our Parish Council. I am writing to strongly object to the terms of the terms of the proposed planning application by Rushmore Estates and Midsummer Homes to site 7 new houses on the site of the field located at the junction of Frogmore Lane and Back Lane in Sixpenny Hanley. I have lived at Manor Farm, Sixpenny Hanley for 53 years, so have a lot of experience of the groundwater and flooding in this area. As Manor Farm lies at the lowest part of the village, all the surface runoff, floodwaters and sewage end up flooding the farmhouse and our land. This has happened on numerous occasions in the past and causes huge damage and disruption. With regards to the facts, this application has been submitted several times with minor adjustments and has been rejected each time. Many local people I have spoken to recently believe this is the wrong location for development due to their knowledge of the groundwater situation over many decades. This knowledge should not be ignored. This field has always flooded and been a useful soakaway for all the runoff from development in the village. There are plenty of other areas in the village more suitable for development that have no flood risk attached to them. Government policy is not to build on areas susceptible to flooding, and this field is in a flood risk area with a changing climate. These flooding issues will occur more frequently. On appeal, the Secretary of State's inspector said, "I have strong doubts that the problem of water backing up and onto the site can be overcome. I have concluded that the surface water cannot be disposed of satisfactorily without leading to flooding on the site and elsewhere. I hereby dismiss the appeal." This planning inspector's report is as valid today as it was in 1992. The comments leading to flooding on site and elsewhere are very relevant, especially to Manor Farm. As a chair of the planning committee, I have received a lot of comments and correspondence on this application, all strongly objecting. I also strongly object to the application. This is Cliff Lane, is the agent. Chair, we welcome the case officer's comprehensive report to you, which recommends this application for approval, subject to conditions. We believe the report tackles all the planning issues in an objective way. Her summary of her findings on the application on her first page at the foot of page 81 and her conclusion at the top of page 90 deal with the matters succinctly. We won't repeat her positive conclusions on key issues on page 82, nor her comprehensive planning assessment starting on page 87. Safe to say her assessment and conclusion are both fair and objective. We do note the Parish Council objects to the application as well as several local residents. We feel all the matters raised as objections have been well covered in the officer's report. We would like to elaborate on one fundamental objection which has been cited against the proposal, that of potential flooding. From the outset, the applicants have done all they can to ensure this issue is dealt with in respect of the site itself and any areas outside the site. Comprehensive technical reports were prepared and shared with the council and its flood advisors. Whilst the whole of the site is in the applicant's control, only approximately half is proposed for the 7 dwellings. A comprehensive surface water drainage scheme is proposed, which holds excess surface water on the site in tanks for it to be released gradually to avoid any surges. It also ensures surface water does not enter the foul drainage system, which we understand has been a problem in the past in Sixpenny Handley. In summary, the proposals adequately deal with the potential flooding issues on site, whilst ensuring runoffs are no worse than at present and ensure no surface water enters foul drains. Picking up on a few other issues raised, no affordable housing is proposed as the scheme of 7 is under the council's threshold of 10. No external lighting is proposed to respect the AONB location. Natural England, Wessex Water, Dorset Council Highways do not object to the application. The case officer is also correct in concluding that the principle of development is acceptable as the site is within the village settlement boundary. The development does not harm the AONB and the design is acceptable. There would be no significant impact on neighbours' amenity. Loss of view and value are not planning matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And
Okay.
I apologise, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't get in quickly enough to interrupt Nicola, because we should, of course, have heard from the ward member before we heard from the applicant there. But we'll hear from the ward member now, and our solicitors, meanwhile, will send me a message if we have to hear from the applicant again. Over to the ward member, Councillor Pearce-Brown, if you would like to address the committee, if you're there.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, but we can't see you.
I know, sorry, I'm in my office, so I can't. But
all right.
I would like to just speak to this application on behalf of my residents, and what I'm going to do is lay out 2 planning reasons to turn down this application, and then 1 moral one. To tell the committee shortly about Sixpenny Handley. Sixpenny Handley is a community which, in broad strokes, welcomes sustainable development. It is trying actively to develop a community land trust to that aims, and I think that's important because I don't want our residents being accused of NIMBYism. The first reason that I think the committee should look into is around car parking within the site. We see from the application that cycle storage is proposed in each of the gardens of the dwellings, which leads to the conclusion that the developer and the planners are under the impression people park cars in their garage, which I'm sure members would agree is incorrect. Plot 3, for example, has no off-street car parking. It's therefore reasonable to conclude that if every property has 2 cars, that we are missing 5 parking spaces off-street. And I note that even within the developer's proposals, we see on-street car parking. The next item I want to touch on is probably the more significant one of which, and the case officer has spent much time highlighting it, and that is around the flooding. National planning framework is very clear. Applications cannot, under any circumstances, make flooding worse for adjacent properties. I'm sure we could all understand why that is the case. Surface water that falls within this development has to go somewhere. Wessex Water have been very clear. They will not accept additional surface runoff because the system in Sixpenny Handley is currently not fit for purpose and they are looking into improving it. Therefore, the developer has suggested a SUDS solution, but that water has to go somewhere. By very definition, it has to go somewhere eventually. And as we know on this site, that water goes across back lane and into the local farm fields. That water is going to be directly funneled onto its neighbour. Therefore, we need to make a decision as a council today whether we put the liability for that flooding onto Wessex Water or whether we put it on to a local independent farmer. And I'm sure it won't take much reading between the lines for the committee to work out which way I think we need to reassess this application. And the last point I want to make is on a moral objection. It's been noted by the Highways Department and within the proposal that the road will be a private road, and if the application granted in its current form with a SUDS programme, the maintenance of which is highlighted on the final page of the flood report, the residents will have to pay additional costs for that ongoing maintenance. This, to me, is wrong. Why should my future residents have to pay an additional premium to live where they live for services that other residents will get for free? The reason is because the developer is trying to shoehorn 7 homes into a site which is not fit for it. So, committee, the decision in front of you today, in layman's terms, is big business, local people or local farmers. This application could come back in a palatable form, I'm sure, in the future, but what is in front of you today is not. And I would therefore ask you to reject it and ask the applicant to come back with a more sustainable proposal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. The indications are that we're all right taking those representations in the wrong order, so that's right. I'm going to go back now to Emily and to Steve to ask them to comment on the main issues that have been raised here before I go to questions. Before I do that, though, I think would someone please confirm for me my understanding that a 1992 appeal is not a material planning consideration for us here today? Is that, have I got that correct, Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. It's material in the sense that it's part of the planning history of the site, but how relevant it will be, considering the change in policy since then, means that probably very limited weight could be attached to it because we have to apply the current policies. So It's not that it's not completely immaterial, but it's probably very limited weight that could be attached to it because we have a whole new planning development plan and also MPPF and everything else to consider these points on since then, since that decision was made.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. It's just that it was mentioned a couple of times. Steve, you're on screen, so would you say a word or two about the issues that have been raised? First of all, about car parking space, and then the issue about it being a private road.
Certainly. Well, the Councillor Brown mentioned the garages not being utilised for cars. We're well versed with this argument, and indeed our car parking guidance, which was produced in 2011, identified the fact that garages with an internal dimension of 6 metres by 3 metres are suitable for use by a car and for storage, and we do allow storage for cycles. In this instance, the cycle storage is separate, so you could argue you've got a large enough garage to park your car in and to utilise it for a workbench or similar. The scheme is private, but that's not to say that we then turn a blind eye and we think that, well, we don't care how much car parking there is. We don't want to overspill out onto the lane. The parking provision meets with our requirements with regards to the fact we allow for the garages, we allow for the on-site spaces. But as I alluded to in my presentation earlier, the actual layout itself has got 5.5 metre wide roads. We'd normally look for private development. We'd accept 4.1 metres for 2 cars to pass. So it means that cars can park in appropriate locations on the layout. And indeed, as Councillor Brown mentioned, the layout does show some cars parked on the site plan. So in terms of car parking, we're more than happy with it, Chair. So what was is that both issues?
No, the second one is the matter of the fact that it's a private road. This is not something we see very often. So could you just explain that in terms of, yes.
What it basically means is that the maintenance of the internal road, the private road, and any associated works, i.e. drainage works and the like, are solely borne by the people who live there, the maintenance company, or as individuals. It's not a liability that is dependent on the public purse to solve. So he's quite right in what he says. It isn't an issue for us as an authority, as a highway authority, to be concerned about, but there are implications, of course, for the residents. But it's not unusual for us to have small-scale developments of this type with private access road arrangements, and I'm sure members can think of much larger scale developments where the roads are private and we have management companies, and sometimes the management companies work well and sometimes they don't. Yeah. But I think in this instance it's a small development that's probably appropriate for it to be dealt with by the management company.
Thank you. And okay. And it's not unusual.
Nope.
can I just ask also in terms of access on the roads are big enough for emergency vehicles and so on to go on, aren't they?
Indeed, yes.
Yes. Okay.
And refuse collection will either be from the curbside or it'll be by arrangement with the private contractor.
Yes. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. I want to go back to Emily now before I come to questions, because I want you to say you have explained the flooding issue, but it came up several times in the representation, so you might want to just respond to some of those remarks that were made. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes.
So I'll just try and, if I go back to the site plan. So what has been said is right. Planning policy does seek to not put new development on areas at risk of flooding. So this map I showed you earlier does show the extent to which this area does flood. Over the course of a previous application and advice that was given in terms of potential for flooding, the applicants have come up with this development in front of you today, which has pushed development into this corner of this wider field. It's been done so that the site itself is not actually in an area at risk of flooding. The houses are all sited away from something from land that will flood, as well as their access being into an area that in itself does not flood. So it's not situated on a site at risk of flooding, and they have shown that they can attenuate all the floodwater that would be caused within their own site. So what that would mean is that they would be like attenuation tanks under the ground that would hold water in times of heavy rainfall, and would hold it until a period of time has passed. The flood waters that could naturally flood along here have subsided and would slowly release it, and therefore not make it any worse than it would be if that site remained undeveloped. So I think that answers everything, Chair.
It does, yes, very, very clearly. Thank you. I mean, you did say this in your presentation. I know that you told us you are confident that the properties themselves won't flood, and that that this development won't increase the flooding for surrounding properties. That's the thing that the committee have to be absolutely confident and certain of. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Cook, question.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple, well, actually three. One partially answered by Steve Savage a moment ago, and that was of the curbside collection. Is Highways confident that there is enough space, because Back Lane is, or Red Lane rather, is quite a narrow road at the moment, that there is sufficient space within the visibility displays to site rubbish bins and not cause either an obstruction or a visual obstruction with when the rubbish truck comes down Back Lane, Red Lane?
Steve, are you happy that the refuse collection?
Yes, I mean, the simple answer to that, councillor, is yes. Manual for Streets, which is the guidance Bible, if you like, which I often quote you in, perhaps probably done it 3 or 4 times already today. When we're looking at visibility displays, it does allow intermittent obstructions. OK, so you've probably seen before, and we've discussed when we've had lampposts or telegraph poles or the like, parked vehicles are allowed within visibility displays as well. In this instance, in a road of a rural nature, one would hope that firstly people would put their wheelie bins and their refuse containers in a position where they're not causing obstruction. But it is an intermittent thing. It happens once a week, and we couldn't actually recommend a refusal because of that. It may be that the residents, if they've got a private maintenance company here, that they come to some agreement with a private company to secure their refuse collection as such. But what I would say is that the layout there, it's not being offered for adoption. You could get a refuse vehicle around there, one of the smaller ones, which I'd imagine will be visiting other similar sized rural roads in Sixpenny Hanley. So there may be a discussion for them to be having with Dorset Wasters to see whether they could actually get the wagon into the site or not. But having warbled on a bit about that. The answer to the question is yes, we can accept the wheelie bins in the visibility display.
Good, thank you very much.
That's great.
Next question.
The next question is coming back to the original slide, which shows the village curtilage or the village settlement boundary.
Yeah.
Are we absolutely certain, or can you confirm that all the development is within that village infilling line?
Yes, we can. Emily, yes, it is within the settlement boundary, Emily.
Yes, so the development's all in here. The access slightly dips
Obviously,
out of it. The access is here, but yes, the development's within the village infilling boundary.
It is within that. Great, that's great. And the final question is regarding these attenuation tanks. Have they been specified in any way to begin with? And is that specification not only the right specification for the current conditions of flooding, but looking into the future that possibly rainfall could increase or could be in insufficient quantities that it would be the same overall, but in a far smaller amount of time? Is there sufficient capacity built into the system that those attenuation tanks will be as useful as they hopefully will be in this case now, but in say 20 years time, if the climate change shifts any more dramatically?
Yes, Emily, our attenuation tanks are properly specified.
Thank you, Chair. So an extensive flood report was done by qualified flood drainage engineers that does take into account the potential impact of climate change on rainfall, and did show attenuation tanks that could cope with that. There are also some drainage conditions for specific details to be worked up that are proposed to be attached if committee were to grant the application. So we would get some specific details at that point that we would agree and make sure that they were, as they have already sort of done some of that work, to say that they are going to take into account climate change and be fit for purpose now and in the future.
Thank you very much. Did you have another question, Councillor?
No, as long as a contingency is built into that, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Heatley. Councillor Heatley.
Here, that's right.
Yes.
Thank you. Two questions, both about flooding. It seems to me that the relevance of the two earlier applications depends very much on where those applications were planning to put their houses. If they were further east, I'd submit that maybe they weren't terribly relevant. If they're in much the same place, it may be they are relevant. Do we have any idea where they were planning to put the houses?
Emily, do we know?
I don't know off the top of my head specifically. I do know that over what's happened over the last few years is that the number of houses being proposed has reduced to fit them comfortably on a much smaller site that is located outside of flooding. So I do know there has been that shift, but where specifically on that land, I couldn't tell you at the moment, I'm afraid, Chair.
Okay, I mean, I don't quite know what to draw from that. I was tempted to draw the conclusion that it went sufficiently further east that our predecessors were worried about flooding, but the flooding may not therefore occur in the area that is now being considered. It's just I'm just trying to get a feel for how relevant all that is, because it's turned up to a large extent in the objections. The second point is that, so to speak, is what's going on the right-hand side of the site. On the left-hand side of the site, you showed us a map where flooding is currently expected or likely. How far is that map going to change in 30 years' time with climate change? Now, once again, it's probably a pretty impossible question, but if it moves to the right considerably, and that may depend on the lie of the land and the topography, how steep the slope is. Once again, I begin to get a bit worried.
I mean, Emily just did answer this, but have another go. Yes, I mean, we can't predict the future, but we can safely say that rainfall isn't going to get any less or any easier to handle in the coming years. It can only get worse. Emily, can you comment to the extent that you can add to what you've already said? Please do.
So the data that we've got showing on this map is the latest we've got from the Environment Agency in terms of risk of flooding. The land does slope. We do have an idea that rainfall will increase over time because of climate change. Sort of the protection for the site is that sort of the attenuation it will deal with the increase in rainfall. But that part of the site is higher. The land does fall away, sort of down towards Back Lane. But this is the latest modelling we've got from the Environment Agency on risk of flooding. We can't, it's not easy to predict the future, unfortunately.
But I mean, do we know that they, in their perception of risk, are they thinking about risk into the future, or is it risk this week?
They do think to an extent risk in the future.
Chair, could I quickly
could you please
comment
quickly? Helpful.
Thanks, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Emily. That was correct. Everything that was said then. I think we just need to make the point that the flood measures have to be acceptable through the lifetime of the development. So it's not just looking at the situation today. It has to be through the whole life of the development. So there's allowances built in to the technical specification to allow for it to be safe for its duration so that it will account for climate change in that. So the tanks will have to be sufficient in size to accommodate increases in water if that does occur. And as Emily said previously, it will be the specifications will mean that the drainage from the site is at what's called green field runoff rates. So as if the development wasn't there, basically. So it'd be attenuated on the site, and then it will be released, but on a rate that makes it no worse than what it is already. So I think you can have some insurances that it would be safe for the lifetime of the development. There aren't buffers put on the flood areas that you can see there, so we can't say it's close to it, therefore we should take a different approach to what Emily set out. But you can have some comfort that the increased risk through climate change will be considered through the technical specification that Emily's referred to.
That's very helpful. That satisfied me. Does it satisfy you, Councillor Heatley?
Sorry, not quite. The size of the Blue Lake on the left there is going to depend in part on water that is running off from the site, and I think I'm reasonably convinced that measures been taken with the tanks that even with increased rainfall there won't be any more rain coming off the site. But equally, I imagine the size of that Blue Lake depends on water that's running off all over the area to the left on that picture, and if there's more rainfall there'll be more water falling there, and potentially that blue bit will begin to move up the hill. But I don't know whether that's taken into account in drawing these pictures or not.
Well, we have heard that they've had a full technical specification for the flood risk and for the mitigation measures. We've heard that those that technical specification has to confirm that the flood risk is managed for the lifetime of the development, which is to say the future as well as the present. I'm not sure what more we could hear. We're in slight danger of second guessing the technical work that has been done by people who know way more about it than we do. Is this the point on which we have to assume that the people who've advised us know what they're talking about, and they have told us that this would be satisfactory? It's up to the committee, but that's kind of where I think we are.
Thank you, Chair. I think you're right about that. I'm just trying to probe a bit the assumptions on which this is made, and I think I've got as far as we can for now.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you're quite right. It is come to the heart of the thing, doesn't it? This question of flooding. Councillor Rideout, do you have a question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got one for Emily and one for Steve. Highways, please. Firstly, I think my question is around the flooding, because obviously this is the big concern for the residents. But I think it has been mostly answered by Emily. I did have concerns about future capacity and dealing with flood forecast going forward. I think she's answered that one. I do wonder, though, if there's any potential risk of flooding from behind the properties, the proposed properties, from the field beyond to the east. Probably not looking at the flood map, but I just wanted to put that question there. Shall I ask Steve's question now, or
no? Let's finish. Let's address the flooding question first.
Okay.
So, do we presumably you have assessed all the danger of flooding, and there's not danger of flooding from the east, the field to the east, that hasn't been taken account of, Emily? You're muted, Emily. Sorry,
Chair.
That's all right.
So yes, so the development does consider the source, so all the sources of flooding. So these are predominantly where the blue areas are. That's not to say that, you know, there isn't some natural, like at the moment, that there's natural runoff through that field, but the development itself wouldn't be at risk of flooding. It would naturally, any rain that falls sort of around the old rectory would naturally dissipate through the ground and run off in the way that it does right now. It would get to the development in the way it gets, like as it does at the moment, but it would not be a source of flood. It would just be a very normal runoff rate. The development would then, as it does at the moment, as that field does, attenuate and deal with that and gradually release the water down over time. So it's not really at risk of flooding from sort of areas to sort of the east or to the sort of northeast of the site. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay.
Right. Are you happy with that? Your next question, Councillor.
Thank you. Next question's a quick question. I've picked up on concerns of residents about Red Lane being single track lane used by HGVs, large vehicles, etc. has become a bit of a rat run. I'm just wondering, first of all, are there any passing places along this lane? And also, is there a possibility of putting a weight restriction on the lane?
Okay, through you, Chair.
Yes.
This red lane itself is typical of most rural lanes, so there's some places it's a little bit wider and there's some places that it's a bit narrower. If you scale it off the Ordnance Survey plan, there are a couple of places where it's 4.1 metres in width, which is sufficient for 2 cars to pass. But when you drop down to the site entrance itself, as you saw from Emily's photos, it is wider and there's an area of overrun, if you like, which is utilised for passing. I don't think we'd ever be able to put a weight limit on it because I don't think we'd ever be able to enforce it. And you would always say that that larger vehicles were utilising the lane for access to get to various agricultural areas or whatever. I think it's fair to say that it probably is a rat run. And I think back lane itself is a rat run if you didn't want to drive through the 20-mile-per-hour section of the high street. But I think there are rat runs and there are rat runs. I mean, I don't think we're particularly heavily trafficked in Sixpenny Hanley. In the times that I go there, I probably do drive down Red Lane and through back lane, and I can't claim I see too many cars. So it is utilised as a shortcut. There's no doubt about that, but I don't see that as being a traffic problem at all.
Okay, thank you.
That answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think the sad thing is anything called back lane is likely to be a rat run by definition. Councillor Hall, do you have a question or would you like to start the debate?
I do have a question. I think the key to this application is flooding, not only of the new houses, existing houses, of land, not just surface water, but also, by the sounds of it, sewerage. And I think the remedy to this is these SUDs. And unless I've missed it, everybody keeps saying, and then the water will be released gradually, but nobody has said where. Where is this water going to be released? Because it does make a difference, because these, as I'm sure most members will know, these sort of 1 in 100-year weather events are getting more and more regular. and therefore I'd like to know where this water is going, because it really does affect how I will vote on this. Thank you.
Emily.
Thank you, Chair. So the water would be released and it would mimic the same way it runs off at the moment. So the land slopes sort of down this way. So at the moment, water would run down towards Back Lane. What would happen in times of flood is that that water would be attenuated on the site and gradually, and rather than just all be released and cause flooding down on Back Lane, it would be gradually released over time. And so the slow release of water would still would follow the natural landfall and follow where water naturally flows at the moment on the site. So it would flow down towards Back Lane, but it wouldn't be flowing down towards Back Lane at a time when Back Lane is flooded as it does in times of heavy rainfall at the moment. So hopefully that answers the question, Chair.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Hall?
Well, I think it's slightly presuming that the water will be released during periods of parched weather rather than on saturated ground, but I accept what has been said and I know how I should be voting. Thank you.
Does it mean that, Emily? Because I that wasn't quite what I understood, so I need to be clear. As I understand it, the water will be released. It won't be waiting until we're having a dry spell. It will just be released after the flooding has finished. So we need to be absolutely clear about this. I see Hannah's come on screen. Hannah Smith, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm not. Thank you, Chair. I'm not a drainage expert, but
No,
I know how broadly how these things work, and there's valves in the equipment which basically attenuates the water and releases it at a certain rate, which would be no greater than how it's released across the site as the land naturally drains, as Emily's described. So it's not the fact that the valve will work, it will work constantly to ensure that it's mitigated. So it's not that it will hold it back necessarily and wait till it's dry. It just will not let the water flow at an increased rate out of the tanks at any greater rate than already occurs at the moment. So there'll be no increase in flooding elsewhere, because this development can't solve drainage problems outside of the site, the scope of the site. What we have to be satisfied with is that the development won't make flooding worse elsewhere, and that it's safe for the people living there. And both those things have been secured through the technical work that's been carried out by our drain and closely looked at by our drainage consultants. When this application first came in a long while back, it was classed as major development, so it went through the whole process of going through our flood drainage engineers and them looking at the technical specification. It is now minor development because it's been reduced in scale below the 10 dwellings, but it still has had all that work behind it to ensure that there's an acceptable drainage solution there for the development, which would be conditioned, as Emily said.
That's helpful. So the key things that Hannah said there is that the houses, these houses themselves are not in danger of flooding, and the development himself will not increase the flooding on the surrounding land over and above what already occurs. That's what I needed to hear. Thank you. I have nobody else in the chat bar. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to say on this application, or can we have a proposer and a seconder? Is there anybody out there?
Chairman, I'm happy to propose that we grant this application. Mary Penfold.
Thank you very much, Councillor Penfold. Could I have somebody
Yes.
who would be happy to second it?
Yes, I think bearing in mind on the quite good discussion that we've had around flooding, I'm happy that the mitigation that has been suggested will overcome that risk, and I'm happy to second.
That's very helpful. Thank you. So I will now, without more ado, I will put this to a minded to vote. Ladies and gentlemen, when I call your name, if you tell me that you have heard the discussion and whether you're for or against the officer recommendation. Councillor Cook?
Yes, I've heard all the discussion. I'm for.
Councillor Hall?
Heard the whole discussion and against.
Councillor Heatley?
I've heard the whole discussion and I'm for.
Councillor Carol Jones.
Been present throughout and voting for.
Thank you. Mary Penfold.
Yes, been present throughout, Chairman, and for.
Councillor Apothecary.
I've been present throughout and I'm voting against.
Councillor Rideout.
Present throughout and voting for.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. So our minded to vote is carried. I will now turn to the head of planning, Mike Garrity, for his decision, bearing in mind our minded to vote. Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I confirm that I've taken the officer's presentation, the representations and the committee's minded to decision into account. And to confirm, my decision is that the application will be granted subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed. We're on the home straight now, ladies and gentlemen, so let's keep our attention focused. We now have our application here for 6 dwellings on land adjacent to 362 Bournemouth Road in Charlton Marshall. So this is Charlton Marshall 2, as having had one there this morning. Simon Sharp is with us now to give us his presentation. Simon, if you're ready, we'd be glad to hear from you. Hello, Simon. Yes, right.
Thank you, Chair. So this is, as you say, the second application that we've heard for Charlton Marshall today. This is an application at the south end of the village. I think what I'll do without further ado is just share the screen so I can talk through the slides, and that will show the context and the policy context better. Are you seeing my screen?
Now, thank you very much.
Thank you. So members will probably be familiar with Charlton Marshall Village. It's along the A350 between Blandford and Bailey Gate. The village is also alongside the trailway, which is the cycle and pedestrian route that follows the old Somerset and Dorset railway line along here. The site, as members can see, is at the south end of the village, adjoining the existing southern extent of the built envelope of the village. The safe settlement limit follows that built envelope, so the site, or the majority of the site except for the access, is outside of the settlement limit. The settlement limit is this black line on screen now, and the site is here, but as you'll see in a second, it does include accesses which are within the settlement limit. So that is the site location boundary in red. This is existing development. There will be photographs of this later. This is the A350. And this is it says dismantled railway. It's the Dorset Trailway, the footpath and cycleway. As members will see in a moment in the photographs, it is actually in a cutting at this point below the level of the main body of the site. This is the site layout plan, so it is all matters are being considered, members. It's a full application. So there are 6 detached homes. The areas shaded in green are the private gardens of those homes. This is the shared private access way for 5 of the 6 dwellings, these 5 here. The 6th dwelling and the existing home, 362 Bournemouth Road, will share a second private drive, which joins the main access at a point right next to the A350. There is a second access at the moment serving the house here. The condition in the late papers, the additional condition, requires the stopping up of this access. So this is the access referred to in the condition on the late papers. So this just gives you that better context of where the site is in relation to the existing built envelope of the village. These are bungalows, albeit many of them have first floor accommodation within the roof space, as you'll see from the photographs. So this is the A350. The point of access is pointing out by this arrow. As members will see in a moment, the land levels for the actual housing, including 362 Bournemouth Road, just off shot to the left here, is higher than the A350's carriageway. The other thing you'll note from this photograph, members, is the footway is on the opposite side of the vehicular carriageway to the site. There is a footway on the west side of the site's side of the A350, but it terminates short of the site entrance, and that is referred to in the officer's report. The other point to notice is that the access is within the 30-mile-an-hour stretch of the A350, but only just. The point where the photograph was taken is in the 40-mile-an-hour stretch. So this shows what the visibility is like at that point of access. So this is looking north towards the village centre, and this is looking south. As you can see, that's where the 40-mile-an-hour stretch starts. This is now on the opposite side of the A350, which is in the direct foreground to the site. So the access for the 5 of the 6 dwellings would cut through here. And as you can see from the motorhome, the existing levels are significantly higher than the road level. So in effect, a road, the private access, shared access, would have a gradient to rise up gradually to the main body of the site. And you'll see from the conditions that one of the conditions requires that gradient for a certain 5-metre stretch of that slope to be no greater than 1 in 12. But suffice to say, there will be a gradient all the way up to get to the main body of the site at the high level. So now we're looking back towards the A350. Your point of reference, members, is the motorhome that you saw in the previous slide. So now we're looking back towards the A350 and the tree with the ladder. You can just see that ladder poking up just above the Land Rover there to give you a point of reference. This is the site boundary with the existing dwellings to the left, and the existing applicant's dwelling, 362 Bournemouth Road, is behind this planting here. Now we're looking back towards the main body of the site from along that same alignment of the proposed vehicular access for the 5 of the 6 dwellings. So just as a repeat, those photographs were taken in this area here. You can see the existing dwellings of Maygrove to the north, and the motorhome was parked in this area here to give you a reference point. So I thought I'd just give some references of the what the dwellings are adjoining the site. So you can see the 30-metre separation distance approximately to number 15 Maygrove. You can see what I was saying earlier. It's a bungalow with first floor accommodation in the roof, and you can see there's clearly windows serving habitable rooms directly facing the site, and currently an open post and rail aspect to the site. The site starts here along this boundary, so that boundary there is this boundary here on this plan, and this dwelling proposed is this one here. So this is the rear elevation facing that dwelling. And that's it in a larger form for your information, members. There are 3 house types. This is one of the 3 house types. Same house type to number 17, which is off camera to here. Struggle to get actually a view of the rear elevation of this house. This dwelling here is actually number 19 that you're seeing. But you can see there's a 40-metre separation distance on this one. This is number 19. So you can see again there's windows serving habitable rooms, and this greenhouse is on the boundary here. And the distance that's referred to in the report is the 16.5 metres to the garage, more to the house itself. And this is the dwelling that's proposed on this plot. So you can see it's the gable end of the dwelling that faces number 19. I'll just go back so members can visualise that relationship. I'll come on to the fact that there's pedestrian gates into the site later in the introduction, but it's something for members to note. And this is again a larger plan of that house type. You can see that they are 2-storey, but again the accommodation is actually contained within the first floor of contained within the roof space at first floor, so similar to a number of the dwellings on Main Grove in that regard. Now we're at the top corner of the site, adjacent to the Dorset Trailway, and this is number 21 May Grove, and the summer house here is tucked in this corner. So what we were doing is we were heading along this boundary, looking at the relationship with these dwellings. There is obviously another dwelling directly affected, number 11, where they'll have the access alongside their rear boundary, albeit at this end it'll also be in the cutting as it rises up from the A350. And as you can see, that cutting doesn't level out until you're actually up at this level. And these datum points in red show how that road level will rise up around this bend to get to the main body of the site here. This is the 3rd dwelling type, which is a larger dwelling type with some full 2-storey element, but that is on the other side of the site. So now we're in the main body of the site, looking back at the rear elevation of 362 Bournemouth Road, the applicant's home. So the access will come up for the 5 dwellings to the left, near to where this gate is, and then the access for the 6th dwelling will loop in here, past the cabin to where the 6th dwelling is here. Again, you can see that there are windows serving habitable rooms facing in towards the site. Now we're looking back up, you can see, members, how the land rises to the rear boundary, the Dorset Trailway boundary. This is the site boundary to the open countryside, marked by this fence. You can see the footbridge over the Dorset Trailway, which is set in the cutting. So the land falls away back towards the A350, because obviously it's in the Stour Valley. So it's probably best to point out at this juncture that there are these mown paths across the site. Officers understand that there's an informal private agreement whereby the residents of Maygrove can come out of their back gardens and walk across to a gate here, which you'll see in a moment, members, to access down onto the Dorset Trailway. That is, there's no public rights of way, there's no permissive rights of way, There's no adopted highways across the site. It's purely an informal agreement. So now looking back, so you can see, pick up the longer views across the valley. Here's 362 Bournemouth Road again. So the houses, the bungalows, the dormer bungalows on Maygrove are off shot to the left, and that site boundary with the open countryside is here. Obviously, the site itself is in that countryside at the moment, in visual terms, and also in the local plan development boundary terms. It's beyond that development boundary, and as you can see from the officer's report, there is that conflict with the development plan, with the local plan, and the pure and simple, the reasons for bringing this application with the recommendation to grant is because of the tilted balance, which you'll obviously be all very well versed with. So now we're on that rear boundary with the Dorset Trailway. You can see the surfacing, the bound gravel of the Dorset Trailway at the bottom of the cutting. This is the what will become that ecological corridor referred to in the officer's report and in the conditions. There's that summer house number 21 Maygrove that you saw in the photographs earlier. So that's that boundary with the existing development. Here is the gate that people informally use, which then accesses steps down the side of the cutting onto the Dorset Trailway. And here's that footbridge that you saw in the photographs, which is a private footbridge and clearly not used by anybody, and it doesn't actually go anywhere. It just terminates on the other side of the footbridge. It's a historical railway feature, clearly built when the railway last operated. Now standing in the Dorset, on the Dorset Trailway, looking back towards that footbridge, so we're looking south. The site is on the left-hand side, the site level up here. You can see the fence posts, so that gives you an idea that the railway is set in a cutting at this point. Here's the steps down from that little gate that you saw in one of the preceding photographs. Now we're looking north, just by that footbridge and by those steps. There's the number 21 Maygrove summer house again for reference. And you can see the site level is above the Dorset Trailways level. And this was actually the applicant's photo montage to give some of that context with the Maygrove housing here, the fields here, the A350 here, and the Dorset Trailway. So members, there's a few points just to cover before handing back to you, Chair. I know a number of the comments have been made about the gradients onto the A350. I think probably Steve may have some comments with regard to highway safety point of view. In terms of actually accessibility for all, and particularly those with protected characteristics, it is fair to say that the gradients within the site are less than ideal to get up to the main body of the site, and it's a balanced decision about accessibility. And one also acknowledges that one has to cross the A350 to get to the segregated footway on the other side. There is not a footway extending to the site access, and nor is there the ability to provide that footway on that side. So that is a balanced decision in terms of the sustainability of the site, but you'll see the officer's conclusions that we feel that on balance it is that sustainable location, and on balance does provide that sustainable accessibility, taking into account people with varying abilities for access, including those with protected characteristics. There is also the issue of bin collections, refuse collections. You'll see that there is a maintained objection from our own Dorset Council's refuse collection service because of the inability for our own refuse vehicles to access the site because of the geometry of the private adopted highway. But you'll see that there is a condition proposed within the suite of conditions to ensure that a private refuse collection is agreed to enable that to happen safely. I've already touched on the footpath position, and obviously, as I say, there is going to be that irrevocable change to the experience from the existing residents, and you know, there will be, because of the fact that there will be dwellings to the rear, there will be a change to those residents' residential amenity. But again, balance officers consider that that isn't to the extent that it's going to be significant, and in the overall tilted balance, something that is significant and demonstrable collectively with other impacts to warrant a recommendation of refusal. So that concludes my presentation, Chair, and I'm happy to take questions at the appointed time.
Thank you very much indeed. Steve Savage, would you like to now come in and comment on the highways aspects, particularly the gradient that is an issue we need to understand?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. I haven't got a massive amount to add to Simon's comprehensive report. As you've heard, the dwellings in the existing house on the site are to be accessed off the new private shared drive from the A350 using the northernmost access to the site. Now, this access was...
Simon, could we have the plans back up so that we can, while Steve is speaking?
Just the general site plan will help, Simon. That's the one.
That's lovely, thank you.
Okay, so you can see the northernmost access there.
Yes.
That was improved in 2019 in accordance with our requirements. So it provided the dreaded manual for streets visibility displays, suitable for the approach vehicle speeds. It's improved the junction radii, and it provided an internal turning area which facilitated the movement to the left-hand turn into the existing house. The southernmost access, which you saw from the photo, is very substandard in terms of available visibility, bearing in mind that the approach speeds are 40 miles per hour for there. So the Highway Authority is only supportive of this particular development if that access is permanently close to both pedestrian and vehicular traffic. The internal layout, the private drive, isn't suitable for adoption, as you'd probably expect looking at it, so it will remain private. So as we discussed on the last application, the maintenance will remain the responsibility of developers or residents. Simon just touched on the fact that Dorset Waste say they're unable to service the site. Curbside collection is obviously exceedingly difficult here due to the gradient and distance from the property, so it will be incumbent on the actual people who live there to come up with a contract with a private contractor, probably to enter the site with a smaller collection vehicle. We've touched on the crossing of the A350. I mean, there's no escaping the fact the A350 is part of our primary road network. Traffic flows are comparatively high, but there are plenty of gaps in traffic. Visibility is exceedingly good there, and it does accord with the Highway Code's objective of saying that pedestrians should be able to see clearly in both directions and find a safe place to cross. So I think on balance that we'd have difficulty resisting it and saying that they couldn't actually access the footway. I think Simon's touched on the gradient into the site. For an adoptive highway, we'd be normally looking at a maximum of 1 in 12. This is substantially more than that. I think it's 1 in 6 in places. But Simon has mentioned to you the implications of having to consider the Equalities Act and due regard and the like. So I'll have to leave that element to him to expand upon further. But other than that, Chair, I've got nothing further to add. I'm happy to answer any questions, of course.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much. We have representations to hear from 3 objectors, the Parish Council and the agent. So Nicola, if you'd like to start reading for us, thank you very much.
Okay. Mrs. D. Forrest and Miss K. Knight against the application. The report mentions the impact on other bungalows in May Grove, but nothing on number 11, our beloved home and garden. It states that the extra drive would be made private for the 5 houses only, but with no gate allowed. How would it be made private? Any member of public driving or walking could enter the site off the A350 main road. Our very necessary important security and privacy would be lost. For us at number 11, this would be a disaster. The proposed application for an access driveway on the northern side would also seriously affect number 11 by introducing regular traffic, particularly at rush hour periods, early in the morning and in the evening. Very intrusive, continuous sight of traffic, engine and tyre noise, exhaust fumes, vehicle headlights shining into our rooms, and light pollution from the driveway, lighting all along the 80 metres of the rear of our garden. The far end of our garden, only 15 metres wide, is by the A350, but distant sight and sound, etc., of traffic is protected from us by the road being well down in a dip. All vehicles entering the first relatively flat 5 metres of the proposed access driveway with 1 in 12 slope would be then immediately asked to climb a severe hill over the second 5 metres times 5 metres high, 12 in 12 slope leading to the proposed dwelling site. The danger this poses is there to all to see, and how pedestrians would negotiate it getting up and down with no pathways we failed to see. A visit to the site would confirm the unsafe high slope. This severe slope could not be levelled out as the existing sewerage pipe from the coach house and bungalow in the field crosses this drive at the top of the slope, approximately 2 metres below the surface, into the collection chamber in number 11's garden, therefore not allowing reduction in the excessive climb. Inclement weather, rain and ice, etc., on the slope would make it slippery, and vehicles could easily slide all along the entire narrow length down to the A350, not a country lane but a seriously busy main road, which is becoming busier all the time. The current soakaway is insufficient and already floods. This water with no barrier would flow down into the main road. Soakaways would not seem sufficient, not be sufficient. This is an ecological danger to people's lives, and it would surely create accidents waiting to happen. Elaine Leaney. I totally object to the above planning application on the grounds that it is unnecessary and intrusive development. It would have a huge impact on my privacy, as the houses would be close and so much taller than my bungalow that they would completely overlook my bedroom, lounge and garden. They would also cut out my sunlight during the winter months. The style and finish of the proposed houses are entirely out of keeping with the surrounding dwellings. The influx of a potential 25 plus persons in the population would put additional strain on the local amenities, and the extra vehicles associated with such compact development would create increased gas pollution and noise. This goes against the national policies on green living. The access and egress to and from the development to the already narrow and bending A350 would create problems, and the likelihood of it becoming an accident black spot. It would completely spoil the rural approach to the village from the south and a view that we all value. I might add that after talking to the occupants of other properties backing onto the development site, I have discovered that there was no prior consultation with any of us from Mr. and Mrs. Adcock. This is from Mr. and Mrs. Tansey against the application. Need, Charlton Marsham and surrounding areas has had much recent development. Planning support statement has excessive wordage but no fact-based demonstration of an overriding need for countryside development outside the settlement boundary to satisfy pre-application response. Density, PPS states 13 DPH as 6 dwellings on 0.45 hectares compared to 15 DPH surrounding. PAR states 0.4 hectares, so density is 15 DPH. Same, not less. PSS states, the council stated that the site was suitable for a similar density character, whereas PAR states density below 15 dph. A transition infers decline in density from 15 to 0, so reasonable expectation is 7.5 dph, 3 dwellings. Access by way of the northern part of the site is the most intrusive location for the residents of May Grove in terms of noise and headlights in the hours of darkness. Southern access would be more considerate and further from the bends on the busy A350. Overlooking, ground floor windows, plot 1 and 2, and first floor French doors, and window, plot 3, overlook May Grove houses. Plot 3 garage needlessly close to number 19. Character, design inconsistent with nearby properties. Currently edge of Charlton Marshall is barely seen on Main Road. 362 Bournemouth Road is well hidden on approach, only glimpses of May Grove properties. Proposed development is hard view to village character. Precedent, changes south boundary to hard boundary, a step closer to Spetsbury. With development in the north towards Lower Blandford St Mary, we are perilously close to a combined Spetsbury Marshall St Mary instead of 3 separate villages with their own character. Villagers resent merging by stealth from development of land between villages. Community support. PAR states I would encourage early engagement, discussing your proposals with your neighbours and the parish council prior to the submission. Not done. Some neighbours not informed at all, others within a week of their application. No date for submission advised, and no attempt to gain feedback. Parish council was not engaged. Residential amenity. Applicants previously allowed neighbours to cross field to Trailway. A key facility for local access, it would be simple to reserve strips of land to provide access for May Grove houses facing development, giving something back to compensate the loss of view. Given precedent for Trailway access in recent the Old Orchard development, proposals should include access to facing properties for safe, peaceful, pollution-free route to local walks. Blandford and Spetsbury, including the school and other amenities. Without such provision, the opportunity to continue access to Trailway is forever lost. Charlton Marshall Parish Council. Charlton Marshall Parish Council unanimously objects to this application. The concerns are as follows. This development is unlikely to meet the local housing needs as the properties are likely to be unaffordable to residents and their families who want to remain in the village. The number of houses and whether the location is sustainable. It is felt that 6 houses is too many for the site, particularly due to the size of the proposed dwellings in relation to the pre-existing adjacent bungalows on May Grove. The site is outside of the settlement boundary and would be highly visible from the road and Trailway, therefore being visually intrusive in the landscape. The development would alter the entrance to the village, development would alter the entrance to the village, would extend the village southwards into open countryside, thereby opening up the distinct possibility of future development encroaching onto greenfield land that forms separation between Charlton Marshall and Spetsbury. The hazardous entrance exit to the site, onto the site, 362 has 2 entrances, one being on a 40-mile section of the A350 and the other on a 30 mile per hour. This means that high numbers of vehicles are still travelling at 40 miles an hour when they reach the proposed entrance. The entrances are on a bend of the road with poor visibility inwards and outwards. It should be noted that there is no pavement, making it very hazardous for pedestrians, cyclists emerging at this location. Furthermore, vehicles leaving the driveway would immediately be on the road. The A350 is a very busy road during the hours of 0700 and 1800. Community Speed Watch records numbers of vehicles at approximately 600 to 1,000 an hour. This includes a high number of HGVs. The steep gradient of the driveway raises safety issues, particularly when there is water or ice on the roads. If the initial section of the driveway has to be levelled, the issue of the steepness of the remaining driveway is not dealt with. There are issues around the sewer location and how close to the surface of the driveway it would be if the surface were to be levelled. There is no detail of the intended width of the driveway and if two-way traffic could pass safely. Negative impact on neighbouring properties, loss of privacy, increase in light and noise pollution. No detail has been provided over the planned height of these houses. This development would be out of keeping with the character of number 362 and the surrounding estate of the bungalows. Okay, so this is Ken Park, the agents. The inclusion of this small parcel of land is a logical extension of the settlement boundary. The land is bounded on two sides by the existing settlement boundary and by the redundant railway line on the third side. The inclusion of the land results in a logical squaring off of the village rather than the encroachment into the open countryside. There is thus logic to develop the site despite the housing supply position. The automatic presumption, however, does not apply, and its application would favour development contiguous to settlements as opposed to within the open countryside away from the settlement. The settlement is identified as sustainable and additional modest housing development will assist, support and maintain local services and facilities. The widened access point into the site is already approved and considered acceptable. The proposed access to the rear will regrade the land so that the correct gradient can be achieved. The access is safe with adequate visibility and the highway officer raises no objection. The houses are all of individual traditional appearance and designed utilising appropriate materials. The density is purposely low with the houses situated on reasonable sized plots. The officer's report confirms that there will be minimal visual impact from the A350 or from the adjoining trailway. The proposals will sit comfortably as a low density village fringe development. The dwellings will be visible from adjoining residential properties to the north. The careful design and siting of the dwellings, however, ensures adequate separation distances with no opportunities for loss of privacy or any other harmful impacts. The proposals step down towards the common boundary. There will be change in the outlook, however, the relationships are not harmful. This modest, well-designed residential development will provide more housing in a logical and appropriate manner relative to the settlement boundary. Development of this site will also assist members resist development that may place reliance on housing supply in less appropriate locations, either locally or across the district. Members are respectfully requested to support the officer's recommendations.
Thank you very much indeed, Nicola. I'm not sure, Simon and Steve, if you want to come in now and make any comment on that or go straight to questions at the points that were raised there.
Chair, no comment from me, Chair.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, no comment to make.
No comment. Steve?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Just a couple of relatively minor things. There was mention made of the danger of accessing the highway from this point. Simon, I don't know if you just go back to that site plan again, please. The actual junction radii into the site allow for a sweep. So when you're coming from the south, from the pool direction, you can actually turn into the site, and the junction radii, you can see there effectively where Simon's got the yellow arrow is a 20-metre junction radii. And in the other direction, it's an 8.5 metre junction radii. If I said to you we normally require 6 metres on a residential estate, they've obviously taken into account the need to decelerate and turn safely into that site, and similarly to get out of the access as well. So I'd just like to point that out. The other issue was mentioned there that the driveway wasn't wide enough. Well, by my scale, it measures 5 metres, and we'd normally only be looking for 4.1 metres for a vehicle to pass. Again, I can't comment on the internal issue of the site because I'm advising on highway safety with regards to the public highway, but I would suggest there are plenty of other roads which are steeper, if not steeper than this in Dorset. I mean, Lyme Regis springs immediately to my mind, but there is an issue, as Simon mentioned, with regards to having due regard for the Equalities Act. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Well, just since Simon wanted to, didn't want to make any comments, I will just start off with a couple of questions I have while I wait for others to come. And the first question is for you, Steve. Can you just confirm, we've said that there won't be room for waste vehicles to access the site. Can you just confirm that emergency vehicles will be able to access the site?
Certainly. Well, obviously ambulances are somewhat smaller than fire tenders. Fire access is a requirement of the building regulations, as you're well aware.
Yes.
I would suggest it would be quite tight to get a normal sized fire tender there, but then they could mitigate the need to do so by providing fire sprinkler systems. So mitigation is available within the building regulations system. If I'm incorrect on that, I'm sure one of my planning colleagues could correct me.
Yes, okay, but it would be tight for a fire vehicle to get in. Yes, we have presumably made it's building regs, not us, that would specify fire sprinklers and so forth. Is that right, Simon?
That is correct, Chair. Yeah, and obviously, members, your comments must be restricted to those things within the Planning Acts and not stray into building regulations.
They must indeed. Well, quite right. My next question then is oh good, there's another question on. My next question then is the neighbours currently have access to the trailway through unofficial access to the trailway. Have I understood that when if this development is built, they will no longer have access to the trailway?
Thanks, Chair. The applicant has included within their in the layout plan a pathway along this southern edge to get to the steps, but it obviously it utilises the private driveway. So in the officer's report, I've made it quite clear that you shouldn't afford any weight members to the accessibility to the trailway, because it is actually across a private drive to this route. And as I say, at the moment, there are gates, as I showed on the photographs, from some of these, if not all of the dwellings that border the site. But it is clear it is only an informal private agreement. There is no public right-of-way or permissive right-of-way or rights of access across the land to get to this point where the steps go down onto the trailway. I think it is an informal agreement between the applicant, who's the owner of the land, and the residents here. So I've made it very clear in the report that when members are considering access to the trailway for these residents and the residents of Maygrove, then the residents of Maygrove will not be able to access the trailway through this gate. I mean, I used another access further up. There are a number of accesses onto the trailway further up, where there's actually the levels are more conducive to permitting a more level access onto the trailway rather than the steep steps here. Yes.
Okay, I would have to say, I think that's quite a loss for those residents that they haven't got that quick and easy access to the.
It is a loss, but
yes, but I appreciate.
Sorry, Chair. I would say that the applicant could stop that access at any time. At any time, because it is purely an informal arrangement. So the applicant would be within their rights to, block those accesses off tomorrow, irrespective of this application.
That's absolutely understood, Simon, and that's a point well made. Yes, it's entirely informal, and so it could disappear at any time. Councillor Rideout, you have a question?
Yep, thank you, Chairman. One of my questions just been answered. It was about this sort of footway pathway to the trailway. My other concerns is on the other boundary facing May Grove. I'd like to ask Simon, what is the boundary detail? Is there going to be any fences put up? Because I noticed in the photographs it looked quite open. It was like a post and rail fence, and particularly the boundary at number 11. I just want to check what that is, where the access is, please.
Thank you, Councillor Ryder. I had, I'm just checking, going through the report to get the right condition. Condition 15 on members' reports, which is on page 113 of the agenda. I too, although I think the distances, the separation distances between the existing proposed dwellings is more than sufficient to protect a significant loss of amenity, I did consider, given that there are the open boundaries at the moment, that boundary treatments needed to be implemented, and the plan was not clear on those boundary treatments, and hence I've put forward condition 15 on the report to cover that matter. Hopefully that responds to your query, Councillor Rideout.
Yes, and in particular, I note the concerns of number 11. Sorry, Chairman, through you, about vehicle headlights.
Yeah, I'll just bring up, if I may, Chair, Councillor Rideout, the site plan, because it might be helpful in explaining the relationship with number 11. So this is, can you see my screen? Sorry.
Yep.
Yes, yep. Yes, we can. Yes.
This is number 11. This dwelling here, and so if you can remember from the photographs, the A350 is at significantly lower level. So the access will obviously be below number 11's rear boundary by some margin. It will obviously rise up, and I know there was reference made to the sewer crossing the site, and hence that's why the gradient achieved has to be a 1 in 6 in places to actually get up to the height where these datum show as it levels off here. So I don't believe there'll be a loss of amenity when vehicles are here, because they'll be down in a cutting. As they're exiting the site, they'll obviously be on grade, and as they swing here, I think there'll be a small potential for headlights to basically on this alignment shine into the back of number 11, but that is covered in my belief by that condition 15 again with the boundary treatments. Okay. As you can see, the road starts then fall away steeply down to the A350, but that's where the condition 15 I think responds to that matter.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Cook, you have a question.
A couple of questions, thank you, Chairman. Yes. Picking up on where the Councillor Rideout was going with this one, if Simon could bring that plan up again. Sorry to have you jumping in and out with this one, but I'm concerned actually with the vehicle headlights when a vehicle is turning out and is just at the beginning of a bit further down from where your arrow is towards the development right there, that the headlights are going to be shining directly into number 13. Is that boundary treatment that is proposed sufficient to stop that happening as well? That's my first question.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. I believe so. The road is starting to fall here, but you're right on the level here. It will be on that same above ordnance datum level as number 13 on that same contour. Obviously, even the higher headlights of say a small delivery truck, the proverbial parcel truck, it would be below a 2 metre fence line, and that's the sort of thing I was thinking of would be the appropriate on this boundary to mitigate that amenity impact.
Yeah, I bow to your greater knowledge. I'm not 100% convinced. Is there any way of putting something in extra into condition 15 that does a test beforehand, just to sort of go out and put a set of even go out in the evening and park a car? No, because the development hasn't been made yet. No, I'll forget that one. Forget that line of inquiry.
I think your point is well made there, Councillor Cook, that what we're looking for from that boundary treatment is that it should be sufficient to not just to for the privacy of the people in the garden, but also that it should be sufficient to deal with the headlights issue, because of course it's dark from 4 o'clock for at least 1 month of the year, so headlights could be quite an issue. So if we could just make sure, Simon, that you're confident that the condition is enough to take account of that just reassure us that you think your condition is strong enough and that we don't need to amend it in any way.
I think it is, Chair, but I really do empathise with members' thoughts on that. It's clearly material planning consideration and something that that needs that response. I believe condition 15 does that, but it's it's clearly a material consideration that members have been raising.
That's one of the things that's keeping me on the knife edge at the moment. But there are others. There are 2 others as well. I think possibly one or both of them are for highways to answer. The first is absolutely. It's been Steve Savage has made the point that there is enough room for 2 vehicles to pass on that access road. However, if we're into the scenario of the small delivery vehicle or the slightly larger delivery vehicle that is not going to be using that site every day, day in, day out at all times, but are highways confident that there is enough room for a vehicle to see into the access road, so that when they're coming from the north, from the Blandford side, that they've got enough visibility to see into that access road to allow them to determine whether they can make the turn, or that they have to sit on the A350 until a vehicle exits? And if not, does that cause a problem? Is there enough room for a vehicle to turn in, realise that they can't carry on because there is a vehicle coming out of the estate, out of the development, and have sufficient room to allow that vehicle to pass?
Through you, Chair. The access road, effectively, if you went halfway up the access road, effectively opposite where there seems to be an outbuilding in the garden of number 11, that it scales 5 metres wide there, and as I said before, we normally look for 4.1 metres for 2 cars to pass. We'd look at 4.8 metres for a van and a car to pass. So there should be sufficient room to do that. I mean, obviously people have got to be driving with care and caution, but I would hope that they would on their private drive. When they get down to the actual Bellmouth access, which is sort of obscured by the arrow where it says access of the A350, as you can see, that does widen out quite substantially. And as I alluded to earlier, with the fact that we've got really wide access and junction visibility there shouldn't be an issue here of one car waiting while the other one comes in or having to reverse onto the A350. And I could categorically assure you that there's no way we would ever recommend approval for anything if we thought that was going to happen, particularly on the primary route. So in answer to your question, Councillor, I'm confident that there's sufficient visibility for vehicles to see as they go up the drive, and indeed there is sufficient room for the van to pass the car with care and caution. We've got to look at the likelihood of such incidents happening, and I know you can't say that they're never going to happen, but the probability is relatively low anyway. But so we're satisfied that it would work as a private drive. These private drive widths, they're probably more generous, if you like, than a lot of other private drives we look at.
Thanks. And stay there, and also
Okay.
a delivery vehicle that is leaving the one property via the southern entrance and wanting to turn south to go towards Poole.
Yep.
There's sufficient turning width to be able to turn safely onto the A350 coming out of that junction.
Indeed, because as I mentioned in the 2019 application, which was allegedly just to improve facilities for the existing dwelling, it did actually widen out that access point so you could carry out that manoeuvre. So that's encompassed within the Belmouth junction that you can see there. So yes, a full lock right turn should be achievable without needing to manoeuvre across the A350 a number of times.
Right.
Okay.
And one last one for you, I think, as well. Wheelchair users crossing from the development to the pavement on the other side. Again, from a safety point of view, you're happy that a wheelchair user can negotiate that crossing of the 350 without any other treatment.
Well, as you can see, there's a dropped curb immediately opposite, which is utilised by the agricultural access. So the answer is yes, they could safely come from that access point across the road, the same as anybody else could if they're crossing safely. We've just got to make sure they're looking up and down the road and only crossing when it's clear to do so. But yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on to comments, I'm a bit surprised nobody's asking the question that's worrying me most, so I shall now have to ask it myself, and that's about the gradient. There was an image that showed the gradient, as it were, as a diagrammatically of the rise as it goes up this drive. I need to be reassured that this is it wasn't that one, it was one. I mean, yes, you can see the levels there. It was a diagram of the side view of the maybe it was a previous image that I saw. This gradient does seem to me to be really quite steep. I am concerned. I do need to be reassured that it would be a reasonable thing for us to say yes to. It's not just for people with in wheelchairs who might not be able to use it. I'm concerned if it was a little bit frosty about anybody walking down a slope like that, the postman or. Can you talk me through that gradient again and give me some reassurance here that this is a reasonable level of steepness to expect to have on the entrance to a development?
Thank you, Chair. It would be a maximum. What I did was I looked at the proposed datum points and then calculated what the gradients would be, taking into account Steve's requirement for the 112 on the first 5 meters. So I calculated that you'd actually get a maximum gradient of 1 in 6, which is obviously a in brief terms a relatively steep gradient, and it is, I think, fair to say less than ideal. Especially coupled with the fact that then you cross the A350 at the foot. I think overall in the round, given the accessibility to the rest of the village and the lack of impact that the development has in other aspects in terms of things like separation distances, then I think, Chair, it's fair to say this is a negative characteristic of the development, but in the overall balance, it's not a characteristic that, in officer's opinion, warrants a refusal. And there are a number of instances of 1 in 6 gradients on private drives, but I accept, Chair, there's no way ducking around it, that it's less than ideal, as a gradient, and members, as officers have done, must weigh it up in the overall balance and, you know, consider, is that actually a show-stopping consideration? You know, the officers, we've thought about this and reflected on it, I think it's fair to say, it quite a long time, and said on balance, the impacts are not significant and demonstrable applying the tilted balance, but that is, you know, it is less than ideal in the overall balance.
It is indeed, yes. That's exactly where we are. Councillor Jones, you're waiting to come into with a comment, but I have Councillor Penfold who'd like to ask a question. So may I bring her in first?
Of course.
Councillor Penfold.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It was just a question, and following on from what you've recently said, what is the surface of this likely to be on this access? Do we know?
It is proposed as a metal surface.
I'm just thinking, as it's on a gradient, and if, for example, it was slippery, I'm sure you understand where I'm coming from, particularly if there was anyone in a wheelchair, for example. I just wanted to ensure that it wasn't going to be slippery and it wasn't what can I say, smooth, if you know what I mean.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, as you know, Mary, from our previous meeting, I have some concerns about this gradient, but I've taken the advice. Is there anything we could say, Simon, to condition that it should be a non-slip surface? Would that be reasonable? I was
thinking as you were saying it, and wondering whether there is an ability to provide a condition which would be a pre-first occupation of the houses for the details of that surface to be agreed with us. I mean, I'm really thinking on the hoof now. I was also thinking about grit bins and all the rest of it as something. But I think I think that would meet the tests of a planning condition. I think it'd be reasonable. I could see how it would be necessary responding to members' thoughts. So I think, yes, Chair, that we could have a condition requiring the first occupation of any of the dwellings, that details that surface to be agreed of that shared private way, and for it to be of a particular specification to provide that grip. And for that, then that surface to be retained for the lifetime of the development. Yes, I think a condition could be worded in that regard and be reasonable.
Thank you.
That would be really helpful. Councillor Jones, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you. I just feel a bit uncomfortable about this whole development, I have to be honest. Certainly if I was an existing resident, I too would be against this application, but then I also have to say that sometimes the fear of what is expected is greater than the reality of what is produced at the end. But I do see the problems. I too was worried about the gradient when it was icy, and I can just imagine a car slipping all the way down straight into the A350. I don't know how sufficient a non-slip surface of road would actually, I have no idea. I'm not technically, I have no technical know-how in that respect, but I would also be a bit peeved if I was a resident there relying on private waste contractors when I'm probably not paying any less council tax. I can also see a problem with the delivery vehicles of building supplies trying to access with all the bricks and timbers and goodness knows what. I just see some problems. If there was a clear reason for refusal, I would be minded to support it, but I don't know that my concerns are grounds for refusal, but I just feel very uncomfortable about this one. Thank you.
Well, I'll go to the next comments and then I'll come back to that to see if there were grounds for refusal, if that's where the committee wants to go. Councillor Belinda Rideout.
Thank you, Chairman. I too have lots of concerns about this application. I'm not happy. It doesn't sit very well with me at all. So I agree with Councillor Jones, what she's just said. To me, I think the whole layout's wrong. I'm sure there could be a better layout which might take out that very steep driveway next to the existing buildings in May Grove. I personally think it's overdevelopment of the site. Lose a house, you might get a better internal road, which then may be adopted by highways. I don't like the idea that these people, the future residents will have to work out their own waste collection. I don't like the materials either, which has been mentioned in concerns. The cladding, just not in keeping. And I don't believe the size of the properties are meeting the local need, 4 and 5 bedroom. And the impact on neighbouring amenity, which we've talked a lot about through the discussion. And last but not least, the steep access. I think it's just awful, and I don't think it's any good for vehicles. It's not any good for pedestrians or those with pushchairs and prams. Thank you. And I'd be minded to second if Councillor Jones is proposed. Refusal.
Right. Okay. Good. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Apothecary.
Not surprisingly, I agree with the last two speakers. Actually, I have huge misgivings about this. Firstly, it's outside the settlement boundary, so you know it's not an automatic, is it?
No.
I think the buildings are too high for the village edge. Actually, I think it's an unsustainable location without a car. I think the emergency access is a real concern regarding the fire engines and things. All because of the unreasonable gradient. There is the amenity regarding the headlights. I'm not even sure JCB would get up that slope to build the houses. And I can't really see what the benefits are. So I'm very much with the other two councillors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are working towards some grounds for refusal then. We're looking at objections, and I need Simon and Hannah to help me with this here. We're looking at objections on grounds of overdevelopment. It's considered to be overdevelopment of the site, and also so we've got overdevelopment, and I think you also said it was overdevelopment in terms of the size of the buildings. That's not overdevelopment, is it? That's whatever that
scale.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Scale, overdevelopment. We're also looking, we don't care for the materials because we're saying that the cladding is not particularly in keeping. It's outside the settlement boundary, which means that it is it's in the balance, as it were. So it's not an automatic acceptance. And we think it's an unsustainable location because there wouldn't be access to anywhere very much without a car, and particularly layout. We don't like the this goes back to there being too many properties, properties in the space, and that means with the consequence that the layout is we're not confident that fire tenders could have access to the vehicle, to the space, and the layout also is the reason why we've got such a steep access. I don't know quite what we call the access, but that's the key point. So I need some help, if you don't mind, with what we're putting under access. And the final point was neighbour amenity. That was all that was listed. Hannah, does any of that amount to a grounds for objection, or Simon?
Shall I? Well, I'll probably just going first back to the fire, the emergency service, the fire service access. I would caution members against using that as a reason for refusal, given that it is covered by other regulations in this instance.
Thank you very much. We'll drop that one then, if that's
the
not
building regulations.
Yes.
Materials, and I would just yeah, I would remind members that obviously Charlton Marshall, there is a very eclectic mix of materials in Charlton Marshall. There is a variety of renders, bricks. Actually, having walked around the whole village as part of my assessment of the application, I think all materials were present and all colours and hues. So my officer advice would be to caution you.
That's not a strong one
with regard to materials, but obviously it's up to you members on that matter. With regard to scale, obviously going back, I can get the slides up again, but the applicant did carefully respond to the context of the bungalows with the first floor accommodation on the roof by proposing the same, by proposing what planners sometimes call 1.5-storey dwellings. It's not a term I particularly like. I call them 2-storey dwellings, but the first floor accommodation is, as we saw from the plans earlier, contained within the roof space. And it is also, as I showed members earlier, the distances, the separation distances between proposed and existing dwellings is quite significant. We're talking 30 metres, as I showed on the plan. So just a point to bear in mind. The densities, again, I looked at the densities in the locality. Yes, I think it is appropriate for distances normally to decrease as you get to a village edge, but my honest opinion is this is not a sensitive village edge location, because you are screened from the A350 because of the planting on the A350 even in winter, and because the A350 is at a much lower level. You don't get the views of the site when approaching the south. And because the trailways in the cutting, you don't really pick up the views of the site. Yes, I think you will see the tops of the nearest dwellings, but is that really out of character when you're already picking up the fact that you're entering the village as you pass under that footbridge anyway? Again, it's the officer's opinion. It is a subjective call, and obviously members are fully entitled to come to a different balancing exercise, but that's just an officer advice to you with regard to that one. With regard to the gradient, I've already provided my comments on the accessibility of that gradient, and Steve's also provided his comments on the highway safety. So that's the comments really, but obviously we can defer to Hannah to assist you further, Chair.
Yes, I mean, I take your points absolutely, but the committee are very firmly minded to they're not at all comfortable. A number of us are not at all comfortable with this application, so we would like I'm minded here. Hannah, do you want to come in, or I'm minded whether or not we need to adjourn for a few minutes?
I think we Chair, sorry, I wrote down a lot of points,
yes.
And I think Simon's done a great job there. Thank you, Simon,
yes.
for identifying the points that wouldn't amount to a refusal reason that we could defend at appeal, and that's what we really need to draw out.
We do. From
the points that were raised. So I've got layout, overdevelopment, waste collection, scale being excessive, neighbour amenity, steep access, outside the settlement boundary, emergency access,
an unsustainable site,
unsustainable location. So I think on each of those points, you really need to draw out what the harm is on each of those points. Like, we can't have a refusal that contains all of these points in one, because they're quite different issues and quite different impacts. So I think one that's definitely coming out is the layout issue, I think, here, and I think that's reflected in the steepness of the site and whether it's inclusive for all users. That's a point that I think, potentially because of the gradient we could have evidence if we were in an appeals situation to defend that point. I think
I could help you there, Hannah, maybe. So I think, I'm not sure it's been reflected here, but the gradient on the internal estate roads at being at points at 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 is substantially below the maximum that's recommended by inclusive mobility, which applies to both privately maintained and publicly maintained highways. Of course, the weight that is given to that is for the committee to decide, and for Mike to decide as the decision-making officer. But there is a departure here from national guidance.
That's very helpful, thank you. So that's Hannah, your gradient, the layout. Yes, carry on, Hannah. You were working your way through. Thank you, Hannah Smith. Sorry, I've got two Hannahs here. Hannah Smith, carry on. Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, so thank you, Hannah, for that. So that was the point on the layout that councillors were indicating they weren't happy with is the steepness of the site that Simon's illustrated in his layout. So I think there's a point there definitely that we could include potentially. I think in terms of overdevelopment, that was sort of in relation to the layout again, wasn't it? So I'm not sure whether that's a separate point or not, because each dwelling is sat in quite a generous plot. So overdevelopment normally means a cramped form of development. So I think it needs some more guidance on that in terms of the overdevelopment point, potentially, to have that as a refusal reason. And I just comment on it being outside the settlement boundary. I definitely take the point the council has made about access to services, but this is one of our larger villages.
Yes.
It is opposite a footpath that leads all the way to the public house and the other services in the village. I know that they're fairly minimal, but our spatial hierarchy does indicate this is a location that is sustainable. So whilst it's outside the settlement boundary and that is a policy conflict, it's how much weight we can attach to that when we're applying the tilted balance. I just make that point there. Sorry, Mike, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with Hannah that we've got to be a little bit careful about not throwing sort of everything at this one, because it seems to me that there are a number of threads of this which are not quite right, that individually may not actually amount to a substantive reason for refusal, but actually in the whole there's a concern about this particular site. Whether it's the overdevelopment of it, there's aspects of it that are amenity related, and we obviously are starting from a position that is outside the settlement boundary. So there are some amenity issues there, and the access is quite clearly, as Hannah has pointed out, some issues with that. I wonder, you were about to suggest an adjournment for a few moments, Chairman. Yes. I would be quite happy for us just to have a few moments just to reflect on those particular points and maybe come back and just resume the conversation.
That would be very helpful. Yes.
Because I think I wouldn't mind having a conversation with both Hannah's and the case officer Simon on this, just so that we are clear. Because I think what we've got to be careful of is that we have to follow the tests as far as the tilted balance is concerned, and be satisfied that the impacts are of such significance that we think they weigh in favour of a refusal, and we want to make sure that we're giving you appropriate guidance on that particular point. Based on, I mean, I think we can gain a good appreciation of the tone of the committee's concerns about this site, but I think we want to just have a bit of reflection on that.
Yes, that would be enormously helpful. Do I just adjourn now, or do I have to put it to the vote that we adjourn, or I just say we're going to adjourn now while you deliberate about this and reconvene? I think I just adjourn the committee now, don't I?
Yeah, yes, you can just adjourn.
Yes.
Sorry, yes, yeah.
Yeah, how long do you think you would need? Take
if I speak to Hannah Smith, Hannah, do you would you think 10 minutes would be enough for us to have that conversation?
Yes, Mike, I think that would be long enough.
Would that be acceptable then, Madam Chairman? 10 minutes?
Yes, we have, and I've just had a remark in that to bear in mind, of course, that we have a climate emergency and we are encouraging people not to use their cars. And so another point that again, I'm not making a shopping list, but one just to remember to address when you're thinking about this is whether it's a sustainable location in the sense that it's one of our larger villages, but that there's a question about whether or not one could actually get from that space to anywhere else, because there's not a shop in the village. Look, let's adjourn. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I think we are now back online. Our officers are back with us after that short adjournment, rather longer than you said, which demonstrates that we set you rather a knotty problem there. So thank you very much indeed. I see Mike, you're on screen. Would you like to tell us where we are, what we've concluded?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, apologies for this. The longer than I thought. We talked around it because I think members had flagged up some important considerations there for us, and we want to just be clear about where we stand with the policies and the tilted balance. I think from our perspective, we think there is legitimate scope from what members have told us and their concerns around particularly the gradient and the arrangements with the gradient in terms of access and you know, for people of a particular disposition, and we think that the layout for that reason has certain compromises which we think could justify an argument as to why it's unacceptable. So I think that's our starting point, and we have to accept the fact that it is outside the settlement boundary. Which I think from that perspective, we have to then consider that against the tilted balance and whether or not there is significant reasons that would outweigh that tilted balance. Between ourselves, we had the conversation around that, and we've before we get on to just give you a summary of that position, I was going to ask you if you would be happy to delegate authority to me to finalise the precise wording of that reason in conjunction with yourself. Because I think we can give you the gist of what that is, but we would just want to make sure that the precise wording is sufficiently accurate. If you get my drift on that,
I would be very happy with that. Can I go to the proposer and seconder? That's Councillor Jones and Councillor Rideout. Would you be happy at the end of this for us to delegate the fine wording of this to the head of planning in consultation with me? That's where we might get a better answer.
Yes, I'm very happy, Chair, and I'm sorry to have caused such an issue. To be honest, it's just the gradient makes everything so difficult and dangerous. That's if that had come out straight onto the main road without that gradient, I think we could have managed and lived with that, but it's a problem.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just add then, if I could bring in Hannah Smith now, because I think Hannah can give you probably a better than I've phrased it summary of the points that we were actually discussing, just so that members of the committee are clear about what would be the basis of that reason for refusal.
That's excellent, Hannah. Tell us on what grounds we're refusing.
Thank you, Chair. So as Mike's explained, the main issue that we consider there are planning grounds to refuse on potentially is the site's gradient and also its location outside of the settlement boundary. So the refusal reason would be along the lines of how, in regard to the site's location outside of the settlement boundary and the public sector equalities duty, the layout would fail to provide a satisfactory gradient for future occupiers of the properties, especially those with protected characteristics. It would therefore be contrary to the spatial policies in the local plan policy 2 and 20, and also the MPPF that seeks to provide inclusive design for all users, and it's basically not considered that enough effort's gone into minimising those impacts on people with protected characteristics.
That's very helpful, thank you. My proposer and seconder, are you happy to propose and second a vote for refusal of this application on those grounds that Hannah has just outlined, subject to any necessary further refinement of those words if they need further refinement to make them even more robust? My proposer and seconder, Carol and Lynn.
I'm happy. Is there no way we can bring in the fact that we're worried about ice slipping onto the main road, grit bins, large vehicles accessing, no fire engine possibly being able to get up there at a last minute emergency?
I think we were advised that the fire access would not be helpful that was one that we were steered away from
Okay.
a little while ago. I think in terms of ice and slipping and so forth, that's covered by what
Okay.
Hannah's outlined. If
Thank
you're
you
happy
very
with
much.
that.
I'm happy if you're happy.
Yes, and Councillor Rideout has indicated that she's happy. I think we're probably ready to put this to a vote. If nobody has anything further to say on it, yes, I think have I just frozen? I've just got an indication that I've got a bad network quality. No, you can still hear me. Somebody please nod.
Yes, you can hear you.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. It's just I've got little notes up. Look, we're now putting to a minded to vote that we're going to refuse this application on the grounds of the fact that given that it's outside the settlement boundary and the layout with particular reference to the gradient, as in the words that Hannah just outlined for us, and we are now going to put that to the vote. We are minded to refuse. As I call your name, could you indicate that you've heard the whole discussion and how you would like to vote? Councillor Cook.
I've heard the whole discussion. I vote for refusal.
Good. Councillor Hall.
Heard the whole thing, voting for the proposal.
Councillor Heatley.
I've heard the whole discussion and I'm voting that we refuse the proposal.
Councillor Carol Jones.
Yes, I've been present throughout and I'm voting to refuse.
Councillor Mary Penfold.
Present throughout, voting to refuse.
Councillor Apothecary.
Present throughout and voting to refuse.
And Councillor Rideout.
Present throughout, Chairman, and voting to refuse.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. I would now go to you, Mike, and if you'd like to please give us your decision.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I can confirm that I have taken the officer's presentation, the representations and the committee's minded to decision into account. My decision is that the application will be refused for the reasons as we've outlined in the debate relating to the gradient and the implications for the layout as a result of that, and the fact that it's outside of the settlement boundary, and that we think that there are significant reasons for harm as a result of that the committee minded to refuse on. This is subject to the final wording of that reason for refusal to be agreed with myself and you, Madam Chairman, prior to issuing the decision.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good. Thank you very much. Members, we have just one tiny little thing left to do, which is to say that there are no urgent items and there's no exempt business. So that brings us to the end of our deliberations today. I think that was a long meeting and I thank everyone for their patience and for all the work that they've done today, because it was a long meeting, but I think we've made some sensible decisions. So thank you very much, and I will now close the meeting at 16:45. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Chairman.